Thanks to advancements in science, thanks to the relentlessness of our committed detectives, and thanks to an unwavering commitment by the city of Austin, finally, we have an answer.
For more than 3 decades, the yogurt shop murders haunted Austin, Texas. 4 teenage girls brutally killed, a city left in shock, and a case that went cold. But now, there is finally a breakthrough, and it turns out this killer had apparently struck all over the country. We are going to break down how experts solved this case using decades-old evidence, cutting-edge DNA technology, and a painstaking cross-country investigation that finally uncovered the truth. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Now, you might remember hearing about this case, the yogurt shop murders out in Austin, Texas. 4 young teenage girls brutally killed at a frozen yogurt shop. It was recently featured, by the way, in a documentary series on HBO Max. And for decades, it was a mystery that haunted this city. But now, after more than 3 decades, Austin police say the case has finally been solved. And what a long road it was. We are talking decades of dead ends, false confessions, evidence that seemed impossible to process at the time. So we're going to walk you through all this. We're going to walk you through the breakthrough step by step from the old crime scene evidence to modern DNA technology. And we're going to show you how it all pointed to one shocking suspect who has now been linked to more crimes and more deaths. So this all began on December 6, 1991, at a small frozen yogurt shop in Austin called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt. You have 4 teenage girls, Amy Ayers, who is just 13 years old, Eliza Thomas, who is 17, and sisters Jennifer and Sarah Harbison, 17 and 15. They were all brutally killed. The Harbison sisters had worked at the shop. Amy and Eliza, they were waiting for them to close up. And all 4 girls were attacked. They had been stripped naked, they had been bound, they had been gagged, and they were shot in the head. And then the building was set on fire. Now, police say a .22 was used, but for some reason, Amy was also shot with a .380 pistol. All the girls showed signs of sexual assault. This is a crime that shocked Austin. It left investigators with a nearly impossible case. And the scene itself was a nightmare for evidence collection. The fire, the water from firefighters, it destroyed much of the crime scene. But what was left, and this is important, what was left was that single .380 shell casing in the floor drain. Over the years, police chased thousands of leads. They dealt with multiple false confessions. They arrested 4 men, by the way. 2 confessed, implicated each other, but they later recanted. And DNA evidence ultimately excluded all 4 of them. So it led to the charges being dropped in 2009. For decades, this was a case that remained cold. But then, Detective Dan Jackson took over in 2022. And with modern technology, investigators started re-examining old evidence. And that lone .380 shell casing was submitted to the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network and linked to an unsolved 1998 murder out in Kentucky. And at the same time, investigators retested the sexual assault kits using YSTR DNA, which traces male lineage. Now, we wanted to bring this case to you, and the reason that we can do that is because of the support that we get from Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm, our sponsor. This is a firm with over 1,000 attorneys. You know why they're so big? Because they win a lot. They have recovered over $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. Think about that. In the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. Out in Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. Another client in Pennsylvania received $29 million after being offered only $500,000. And even if you think your case isn't worth millions of dollars, why not start a claim and fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so simple. You can start a claim from your phone in just 8 clicks. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar by clicking the link below or scanning the QR code on screen. The breakthrough came when Detective Jackson coordinated a manual search of YSTR DNA at labs all over the country, and only one lab responded with a match, a connection that would send shockwaves through the investigation and would point toward a suspect with a chilling criminal history. Now, we're going to get into all those details in a minute, but to help me break down this latest breakthrough, I want to bring on a special guest, Joe Kennedy, retired special agent for the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Joe, thanks so much for coming here on Sidebar. Appreciate it.
Jesse, thanks for having me today. Glad to be with you.
Yeah, these yogurt shop murders, this is a really bizarre case. I mean, it remained unsolved for over 30 years. But from your perspective, your experience, let's just start here. What keeps some cases cold for so long?
Well, one of it is bystander behavior. Jesse, witnesses are just reluctant to come forward with the information that they have or the knowledge about a particular crime that has transpired. Also, technology. If you go back to some of these old cases like this one, and we're talking about in 1991, this is, DNA was really in its infant stages. We didn't even have CODIS. We didn't have the combined DNA index system to actually track offenders, across the country.
Yeah, when you have advances like YSTR DNA testing and ballistic databases, even aside from cell phone evidence, which, this basically is on everybody's person and can track them. But when you have advances like DNA evidence and ballistics, that changes the game, right? That changes the game for cold cases?
Oh, 100%, Jesse. What we've seen, really since the Golden State Killer is just an explosion in the use of genetic genealogy. NIBIN, you're referring to ballistics, that database is vastly underutilized. I still think today where we're not entering those old shell casings and cases from 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. But it's really, the big game changer here. And, this individual was actually identified in a murder down in Greenville, South Carolina, 2018. And what's interesting about that is that was kind of, very before the Golden State Killer. When you look at it, Golden State was April of 18. So I think this case was right on the heels of it. So that technology, they actually exhumed his body in Arkansas and obtained some, a DNA extract from, I think, a pinky finger and a tooth, which is kind of interesting because, at that point, that would have been considered, really some cutting edge technology or the early stages of genetic genealogy.
So let me break that down. Let me break down what made this case so hard to solve and how modern science finally brought answers after decades. So Austin's mayor opened a press conference on Monday, September 29th, by announcing this long-awaited breakthrough.
Over 3 decades after a horrible crime took the lives of 4 teenage girls and changed Austin forever, our hearts haven't healed. They're still broken for the precious girls we lost. We've never stopped sending our love and our prayers to their families. As all of you know, the Austin police have announced that a significant breakthrough has been made in the yogurt shop murder case. The detectives today will outline the timeline and process of their investigation. Their investigation is thorough and relies on technology that was not available back then. This day has been a long time coming. More than a quarter century ago, in a circumstance much like this today, I said that Austin lost its innocence the night those young souls became victims. Today, we have some closure. We are different people in a different city. Time has passed. We have endured more, have been disappointed, and have felt defeated and devastated. But today, with the resilience needed to endure something this painful, recognizing the scars, the suffering, and while there's no change to the horror, no wiping away any of the wrongs, no diminishing the grief, we can finally express a deep sigh, a release that comes from knowing. Thanks to advancements in science, Thanks to the relentlessness of our committed detectives who have lived and breathed this case for decades, thanks to the support of Austin Forensics, and thanks to an unwavering commitment by the City of Austin, finally, we have an answer.
Now, Austin's police chief then revealed the name of the man now linked to this crime through DNA evidence, a serial offender who actually died by his own hand in 1999.
After 34 years, the Austin police have made a significant breakthrough in this case. This is one of the most devastating and haunting cases. As a mother, I cannot begin to imagine just the grief and the pain that you have endured. For the families of Amy, Eliza, Sarah, and Jennifer, today marks a critical step forward in honoring not only their memory, but getting at truth and accountability. We now have evidence linking a specific individual to this case, Robert Eugene Brashers. The only physical evidence located at that scene has been matched to him. Brashers died by suicide in 1999 after a standoff with police in Missouri. And his DNA has since been, and before this connection, he has been connected to murders and rapes across the country.
So, Joe, you think they got it right here? Is Robert Brashers the man?
Well, I think in this occasion, they finally have arrived at the correct perpetrator. You know, there were some individuals that were previously arrested. There were some wrongful conviction issues going on with those arrests. But, you know, the science doesn't lie, Jesse. And, you know, when we get into today's modern, you know, cold case detective, what we're looking at is that, you know, almost daily usage of genetic genealogy, you know, coupled with things like NIBIN and some of the other databases that just weren't available. And remember that what keeps most serial offenders from being, you know, identified and apprehended is their mobility. And if you look at this guy's background, I mean, you know, he's all across the southern states of the United States and ends up even in Missouri. And, you know, his crimes, they're not about the sex, right? A lot of them appear to be a sexual motive, but that motive is really about power and control and dominance. And you see that. What's very interesting in this case to me is the age of some of these victims. You know, he had a proclivity for young women, teenagers, and that reveals itself not only in the yogurt shop murders, but some of these other cases that he's been identified as being involved in.
Yeah, that's a pretty, grotesque part about this. The fact that he's dead, and he's been dead for so long, how does that complicate the investigation? I mean, if we're talking about unsolved crimes and we're talking about cold cases, if the suspect dies, they're no longer leaving a trail for years and years and years. Does that delay justice? Does that delay identifying a perpetrator if the person is dead?
Oh, absolutely, because you know you lose the ability to track their freedom of movement. You know, how do they move about? You know, do they use public transportation? Do they use a vehicle? You know, how did he get across the country? You know, and mobility is so important, Jesse. And once the offender is dead, you know, then we have to resort to clearing that case, what we call exceptionally cleared, right? We could prove that he did it. If he were still here alive today, we would charge him with that offense. But you'll see that once the suspect is dead, that kind of limits the investigators in some avenues. However, there's this technique that many cold case investigators use, and it's called an NCIS offline check. And that's where you'll see as offenders like this individual who committed the yogurt shop murders, as they travel around the country, sometimes they're stopped by law enforcement and they're not arrested. Maybe it's a traffic violation or, you know, they're trespassing or something. And so their name is queried into the national database, but that's really all that happens at the time of that event. And then as cold case investigators use that NCIS offline capability, and I'm sure the FBI's behavioral analysis unit is intimately involved in this case as well by now in helping to try to track those movements by using that exact feature that I'm referring to you.
When you have only one piece of physical evidence linking him, though, how are investigators sure? How are they sure that that single item can definitively identify a perpetrator, particularly when you're talking about a crime from so many years ago?
Well, Jesse, we can never determine how and when DNA got to a crime scene, right? We can only determine it's there. What's unique in this case, in addition to the DNA evidence, we also have a shell casing match, which I think is very important. You know, the current cold case detective there in Texas went back, got engaged in NIBIN, you know, the National Integrated Ballistics Information Network, and that thing is also a game changer, along with genetic genealogy, and it was a great investigative step. And what he was able to do is link one of those shell casings, and I think it was the only shell casing they had in Texas, and link it to one of the other cases that he had been attributed to being involved in.
Yeah, the mayor did something. The mayor highlighted this use of technology, which we've been talking about, that was not available back then, right? That was the phrase. It was not available back then, which made me wonder if you had the yogurt shop murders today in 2025, would it take decades to solve or no?
No, probably not. The databases are so good. The explosion of genetic genealogy, the daily use of the NIBIN database. You know, most major cities across the country, just shots are fired in the city. Patrol officers are required to go and gather those shell casings, even if no one was killed or injured, right? Just so they can be entered into the database and maybe subsequently later, you know, associated with a particular offender or a particular crime. So I think there's no way that this case would have taken as long if it was committed here in 2025.
Now, something you mentioned, so lead detective Dan Jackson outlined this horrific crime scene, but also explained how a ballistics match to a separate killing out in Kentucky, that is what first put them on the trail.
So the gist of the MO of this case was the perpetrator entered or remained near closing time when no other customers were present. The girls were found nude and had been tied up with their own clothing as ligatures and bindings. There was evidence of sexual assault. All four had been shot in the head with a .22 caliber pistol, and Amy was also shot with a .380 pistol. And then the building was set on fire before the suspect left the scene. The morning of July 2nd, the ATF sent the .380 cartridge, and that afternoon I was notified of a hit out of Kentucky, an unsolved murder out of Kentucky. So I can't name the name of the city. They haven't done their press release yet, but they know who they are, and they did a fantastic job. But myself, a couple others from the cold case unit, and Mindy Monfort from the AG's office, we flew up to Kentucky to review our cases with their detectives. And the murders did share similar details. I can't go into those. But the preliminary NIBIN results indicate a presumptive positive correlation between the two casings, indicating the same gun was used in Yogurt Shop as it was several years. I'm not going to even tell you the date. Oh, it's up there, 98. So all the way to 1998.
But the definitive break in this case came from a first of its kind manual DNA search that led them back to Robert Brashears.
We reached out to all the labs in the country that do YSTR typing and asked if they could manually search against our unknown profile. And we got a match. We got a hit. Only one. The South Carolina State Lab was the only lab in the country that responded that they had a match, quote, match to our unknown YSTR. All the others had no hits at that level. And I'm talking, this is at 27 to 27 markers. This is the full profile, and every allele was the same. So it took us a couple of weeks. The results were reviewed for accuracy, and their legal department reviewed it. There was like the longest 2 weeks because we knew we had somebody, but they wouldn't tell us. So it was a long 2 weeks. The reason it took 2 weeks to review, I found out later, is because they wanted to make sure they were doing it right, because I was the first person to ever ask them for this. Nobody had requested a manual search against their database before. So they wanted to make sure that legally they were on the right footing and that there was no quality assurance issues. So on August 22nd, they sent me the information, and it was from a sexual assault and murder from 1990, and this was the profile that they had, Robert Eugene Brashears. He has a perfect 27 for 27 match to our unknown profile in Yogurt Shop. I got on the phone with Greenville, South Carolina immediately, and we started conversations about our different cases, how they similar. And one of the things he said to me was, he said, he didn't know anything about the case. He didn't know what it was. And he said, your victims, were they bound with their own clothing? And the hair stood on the back of my neck. And I knew we were maybe getting somewhere finally with this case.
Joe, just one thing I want to go back to with this Yogurt Shop killing. This was awful. I mean, you're talking about a scene of binding, sexual assault, shooting, arson. How do investigators even approach a scene like that? By the way, one that's been partially destroyed by fire and other elements.
Yeah, so interestingly, what we would do, Jesse, is, as offenders leave physical evidence at a scene, like their DNA or, say, a shell casing, they also deposit their personality, right? They leave their thoughts, feelings, and emotions at a scene. And so that's what we have to evaluate in addition to the physical evidence to help us get to the rightful offender. And what you're going to see in this individual's case is, there's a lot of issues going on with him that would be, he'd be classified as a sociopath today. There's no doubt. And you're going to see that this originated or started in him very early in his life. And so that's one thing that we would put a lot of emphasis on is, where was he raised? Who raised him? What was he exposed to as a young person? Because this is where we see some of this, just evil, pure evil and anger. And as we look at crime scenes, think of it like this, Jesse. We're looking to find three things. We're looking for anger, control, or remorse. There's obviously no remorse in any of his crime scenes. So that leads us down that sociopath, angle. And you see a lot of control, though, in the scene. But what you see most of all is anger. There's a lot of slashing and tearing of victims. There's an escalation of assaultive behavior. He carries out his crime in front of witnesses. So, these are the clues, or the behavioral clues, as we call them, the behavioral manifestations of the crime scene that we're looking at to put the pieces of the puzzle together to hopefully get to that correct offender.
Was it strange that you have a perpetrator using multiple firearms, right? The .22 caliber, the .380. Obviously, we talked about ballistics evidence, but the fact that two firearms were used, is that strange to you?
Well, I mean, typically when folks are killed, it's one instrument or agent of death. And the fact that he had two or used to, it could have been a lack of ammunition. It could have been a lack of, just the ability to use a certain gun, or maybe it was a gun that was stolen. Some of his prior criminal history before the yogurt shop murders, you will see they involve guns and firearms. So maybe, he had an affinity for these, for guns. And so he had, more than one. That's not that odd, honestly.
By the way, this ballistics match to this separate 1998 murder in Kentucky, that was huge. You mentioned it. It was so pivotal. But how do investigators identify links between crimes across different states and agencies? How does that work?
Well, again, it's cooperation and collaboration. And, it goes to databases, though, whether you're looking at fingerprints through the automated fingerprint identification system, or the FBI's next generation identification, or what was used in this case, which is, ATF's National Integrated Ballistics Information Network. That's where we're able to use that database to link these shell casings, not only cases in a particular jurisdiction or a local jurisdiction, but we can, essentially track an offender's movements by where those guns are used.
Yeah, and then there's the DNA. So the detectives, they conducted this, again, what we believe is a first of its kind, manual YSTR DNA search. Can you explain why a manual search was necessary, if I'm understanding this correctly, and why standard searches might not add up here, might not be sufficient?
Yeah, so, what we have to upload into CODIS, which is our national DNA database, is we have to have a full profile. We have to have a primary contributor. What happens in a lot of cases is you have partial profile, or maybe some low-level or degraded DNA. And so what is going on in this particular case is once Greenville determines who they think the offender is, they exhume his body, and to get a reference sample back to the DNA that was left at the crime scene, because it's not existing in some database. And so that direct comparison, right, was a match. But what happens in that is there's no DNA left. It's all consumed to actually complete the DNA analysis. So, you have to rely on that one-to-one, confirmation. And in this case, that's what happened.
Now, talking about the families here, the families of the victims, as you can imagine, the announcement was just an emotional moment. It's a long-awaited truth and answer, and the gratitude for the investigators who never gave up. It was quite vocal. Take a look.
I'm really excited about being here. It's been a crazy couple of days, and I just really came here to say I'm full of gratitude It has been so long, and all we ever wanted for this case was the truth. We never wanted anyone to go to jail or be charged with anything that they did not do. Vengeance was never it. It was always the truth. And I'm here to really talk about the police department and how involved and supportive they have been from the very beginning. We have Mike Huckabee, and please keep him in your prayers. His health is bad. And him and John Jones, they were the first people that we fell in love with on the force, because they told us about what had happened. And starting with those guys 34 years ago, they were been in our lives and our families all of this time. And every officer that I see in Austin that has been there for us and loved us, and what they have done, people don't understand how hard they work. Everybody is concerned for the solving of the case. Everybody was concerned about all of us here, because they know the tragedy was so painful and continues to be. But I really just came to say thank you for the Austin Police Department and all the love and support that you have given us over these 34 years. And I thank you for that.
So at the news conference, Amy Ayers' father, Bob Ayers, presented Detective Jackson with a pin that says, quote, "We will never forget." That is a very powerful moment for the families here, Joe, who maybe thought there would never be any kind of conclusion, any kind of answers. What is that journey like? You know, they never sought vengeance. They only look for the truth. How do families of victims in cold cases, I mean, what is that like for them?
Jesse, it's horrific. It's a difficult path every day, because you have to wake up and that loved one is gone. You know, there's this misnomer in cold case work that once a case is closed, that a family gets closure. And that's actually not true. What we give families is resolution as to what happened. That loved one's not coming back. You'll hear people describe it as like, I wake up and it's like you're pulling the scab off of the old wound again. And it has a dramatic effect on families. I mean, it changes or alters how they behave and how they interact. You'll see that a lot of folks, there's separation and divorce that come into families of cold case victims, because, you know, the coping is just, you know, it's a whole new, you know, experience for them. And that loved one is gone, and it will significantly change family dynamics very often.
How do investigators build up that trust? I imagine they have to have this continuing relationship with the families. Maybe not always, but they should, right? Build trust, maintain communication with the families over a long investigation. I mean, investigators have other cases that they have to attend to too. It doesn't mean one is more significant than the other, but what is that relationship, or what should that relationship look like?
Well, I'm going to use a word that may sound a little strange, Jesse, but it's intimacy. We have to create intimacy with those families. We have to gain their trust. You know, they have to see our compassion, that the only reason we really do these cases is for them, and for that reason. They also have to realize that the cold case investigator that's representing them and their family is competent, that they know what in the hell they're doing. And then lastly, that they always have good character and do the right things, right? And that comes down to the trust factor. When you think of those three things, I always say this: cold case investigators have to be compassionate, they have to be competent at what they're doing, and they have to have good character. And one of the biggest responsibilities is interacting with those families, because, you know, we all die, you know, of old age or disease or what have you, but someone shouldn't be able to control the lifespan of a victim, Jesse. And so that's what motivates many of us, is we realize how precious life is and how much that person meant to that family. And that's why we even do cold cases to start with.
And particularly victims this young, this vulnerable. It's just a sad situation. But look, there is a conclusion here. There is a sense of resolution. Our hearts, our prayers, our thoughts are with the families as they navigate now this new chapter of it, right? Trying to make sense of what happened here. There's not a sense of justice in that Brashears was arrested and is going to be put on trial, but this is excellent police work, and it is a conclusion to quite the case. Joe Kennedy, thank you so much for taking the time. It was good seeing you.
Jesse, good to see you. God bless you, sir.
And that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll see you next time.